At 65 years old, I never imagined I'd be sent out of my own son's home, especially not in the middle of a freezing winter night, and especially not by the woman he married. She looked me in the eye and said I was just another mouth to feed, a burden her family didn't want anymore. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, is that I've been holding a secret for 20 years, a secret powerful enough to unravel everything she believes she controls. If you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or pushed aside by the very people you love the most, stay with me until the end, because this story, this one, changed everything. This is her quiet comeback. If this kind of story speaks to you, feel free to subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. The night my daughter-in-law pushed me out of my son's house felt like the kind of night that changes a person forever. The air was sharp, the kind of cold that bites the skin and settles into the bones. But even that cold couldn't compare to the chill that came from her words. I stood on the porch, with my suitcase half-zipped, staring at the door that had just slammed in my face. It wasn't just a door closing. It felt like a chapter of my life was being torn shut without my permission. At 65, you think you've seen enough of life to understand where pain comes from. You expect loss to come with funerals, with hospital rooms, with the quiet endings life forces upon you. You don't expect it to come from your own child's doorway. You don't expect it to have the voice of the woman your son married. "You're just another mouth to feed," she had said. Not softly, not reluctantly, but like she'd been waiting to say it for a long time. A burden, a weight, something unnecessary that needed to be removed. She didn't say it in anger. Anger would have been easier to forgive. She said it with dismissal, the way people talk about clutter they're tired of looking at. Behind her, my son stood frozen. That was the part that hurt the most. He didn't say her name in warning. He didn't tell her to stop. He didn't even meet my eyes. He stared at the floor like a child caught in the middle of a lesson he didn't want to learn. Except he wasn't a child. He was a grown man. My boy. And the silence he chose that night was louder than any rejection I'd ever experienced. I dragged my suitcase down the icy walkway. The wheels rattled, skipping over cracks in the concrete, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier, settling on my coat, my hair, the suitcase ID packed with shaking hands. I hadn't even taken everything, just what I could grab before the moment became too humiliating to stay. I reached the bus stop at the end of the street. The metal bench burned with cold even through my clothes, but I sat anyway. I wrapped my arms around myself, not for warmth but to keep from falling apart. Tears would have come if the moment had been kinder, but it wasn't. There was no space for tears, only shock and disbelief. As I sat there, I went back through the months that led up to that night, all the small, sharp moments that had seemed insignificant at first. The way she grabbed the baby from my arms the second he fussed, not trusting me to soothe him. The way she remade the dishes I cooked, claiming they were too old-fashioned or too heavy. The way she rolled her eyes when I told stories from my childhood, as though the past held no value unless it belonged to her. I had tried to endure it. Losing my husband had left a hollow space in my life I couldn't fill on my own. When my son invited me to stay, I thought it was an act of kindness, a chance to heal in the presence of family. I never imagined I would become the unwelcome shadow in their home, the extra voice in rooms that were no longer mine. Grief doesn't follow rules. It doesn't move in a straight line. Some days I woke up forgetting my husband was gone. Some nights I still reached for him, expecting his hand, only to find cold, empty sheets. And while my heart was still trying to mend, I walked into a home that didn't have space for my brokenness. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, had a way of making every room feel smaller when she entered it. Her smile was polite, but her eyes were tight, calculating. She wanted control, not out of malice, but out of a need to shape her life exactly the way she pictured it. Unfortunately for me, I didn't fit into that picture. She tolerated me at first. Polite invitations to dinner, stiff compliments about my cooking. The kind of courtesy you offer a stranger, not family. But patience wears thin. Resentment grows quietly. It seeps into the air, into the rhythm of a home, into the pauses between words. I felt it long before I understood it. The sideways looks, the whispers in the kitchen late at night, the sudden hush when I walked into a room. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone. "I just need her to sign the papers," she said. "After that, she's on her own." I didn't know what papers she meant. I didn't want to know. But the words planted themselves in the back of my mind like a seed waiting for trouble to bloom. The letter arrived a week later. It was a bank document. I found it by accident while straightening the mail on the kitchen table. The envelope tore just enough to reveal its contents. I saw my name first printed neatly beside a property account number, but something about it felt wrong. My name looked real. Too real. Perfect in a way handwriting never is. Next to it was the owner's name. Not mine, not my deceased husband's, not even my son's. It was Melissa's. My breath stopped. My hand trembled against the paper. A signature that looked exactly like mine sat beneath hers. It wasn't mine, but it was close enough to be dangerous. The room spun. For a moment, I thought I might faint. I gripped the edge of the table, willing my legs to keep me upright. They were taking what was mine. The land my husband and I spent 30 years paying off. The land we had planned to leave to our grandchildren. They weren't just pushing me out of the house. They were removing me from the family line. The legacy. The story. I folded the document carefully, slipping it into my pocket. My heart raced the entire walk back to my room. I sat on my bed for a long time, the letter burning in my hand like a secret no one was supposed to touch. But the real breaking point came 2 nights later. I heard my son's voice through the cracked hallway door. "Just get her to sign it," he whispered. "Once it's done, she can move out. Move out." The words struck something deep inside me, something ancient, something that had stayed silent for too long. It wasn't sadness that came next. It was clarity. I walked back to my room, opened my old notebook, the one filled with memories, plans, and scribbled dreams, and wrote the truth. They think I'm weak, but they don't know what I still carry, because I had a secret. One I had kept hidden for 20 years. One that was never meant to surface. But now, it might be the only thing standing between me and the truth they tried to bury. And that night, sitting alone at the bus stop with snow settling in my hair, I realized something. They had taken everything they could, but they had underestimated me. And that was their first mistake. I sat on that frozen bus stop bench for what felt like hours, though time becomes strange when your world cracks open. Every breath left a ghost of white in the air, dissolving almost as quickly as it appeared. I watched each cloud fade and wondered if that was what families did now disappear the moment you needed them most. The snow thickened, catching in my hair, clinging to my eyelashes until the world became a blur of white and silence. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping over me like searchlights. But no one stopped. No one ever expects to find an elderly woman sitting alone in the cold at midnight. And even if they did, they wouldn't think to ask her why. People see wrinkles before they see stories. My fingers finally stopped trembling long enough for me to zip my coat. I pressed my palms together, trying to warm them with the breath I still had. But warmth wasn't what I needed. I needed resolve, and resolve doesn't come gently. It comes with remembering. So I let myself remember. Not just the betrayal of the last year, but the 20 years before it, the years in which my secret slowly took shape. It began after my husband died. He had always been the strong one, the steady one, the moral compass of our home. But grief changes people. It sharpens some and softens others. And it softened my son in ways I didn't see until now. When my husband passed, I found documents he had hidden away, not from malice, but from protection. Land deeds, investment notes, letters, things he tucked away because he didn't trust some members of the extended family. He knew greed had a way of turning blood into strangers. And tucked inside those papers was something else. A letter, one head never mailed, one addressed to a lawyer he had considered hiring. In it, he explained that if anything ever happened to him, he wanted a portion of our land placed under my sole name, with provisions our son couldn't access until he reached an age my husband believed would bring maturity. He never sent the letter, but he kept it, and after he died, I kept it too. I didn't claim that portion of land for myself. I didn't need to. What I needed was the peace of knowing my husband trusted me enough to protect our future. I put the letter away and continued living quietly, never imagining that one day it would become a weapon I would need to survive. but survival has a strange way of bringing buried things back to the surface. The night my daughter-in-law threw me out, the weight of that hidden truth felt heavier than the suitcase I dragged behind me. And as I sat at the bus stop, I opened my purse, pulled out my old notebook, and tucked the forged bank document beside my husband's letter. Two truths sitting side by side, one of love, one of betrayal, both powerful enough to shape what would happen next. Eventually, the cold forced me to stand. I walked toward a small diner that stayed open late, the kind of place where truckers stop for coffee and teenagers sneak in after curfew. I pushed open the door, the bell chiming overhead. Warmth hit me like a wave, stinging my fingers as sensation returned. The waitress glanced up, surprised. "Cold night to be out," she said gently. I nodded, taking a seat in the corner. She brought me a cup of coffee without asking, one of those small kindnesses that remind you the world isn't entirely cruel. As I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into my bones, I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding. How long had my son been planning this? Not days, not weeks, months. I replayed every moment, every whisper I overheard, every hesitant glance he gave me when Melissa spoke sharply. I realized then that he had become a shadow of the boy I raised, a man so eager to preserve his marriage, his comfort, his pride, that he was willing to sacrifice his own mother. But I wasn't just hurt, I was disappointed. Disappointment is heavier than anger. Anger burns quickly, brightly. But disappointment sits, sinks, settles. It becomes the stone at the bottom of your heart. The waitress refilled my coffee. I gave her a grateful smile. She didn't push me for conversation, and I didn't offer any. Some nights, silence is the only language you can speak. When I finally stepped outside again, the snow had slowed, the streets were empty, but something inside me was different, steadier, clearer, sharper. I wasn't going back to their home, not tonight, not ever again. Walking away wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Strength. True strength. Strength born from truth. I walked toward the small rental room I paid for on the side, something I'd kept even after moving in with my son, more out of instinct than necessity. My husband used to say, "Always keep one place that is yours." I never understood the wisdom of that until now. The room was small, tucked above an old hardware store, but it was warm, familiar, safe. I turned on the light and shut the door behind me, locking it with a finality that echoed through the empty space. I set my suitcase down, hung up my coat, and placed my notebook on the table. For the first time all night, I let myself breathe fully. No one was watching. No one was waiting for me to fail. I opened the notebook again. The forged bank letter stared back at me, a reminder of the cruelty I had endured. I placed my husband's letter beside it. The edges yellowed, the ink slightly faded. 2 pieces of paper, one a betrayal, one a promise. And in that moment, something clicked inside me. I had spent the last year trying to fit myself into a life that no longer had room for me. I made myself quiet, helpful, small, but I wasn't small. I had lived a full life, a hard life, a meaningful life, and I had a legacy worth protecting. My hands steadied as I wrote more notes in the margins of the notebook, dates, conversations, details I had ignored or explained away, not because I wanted revenge, but because clarity demands accountability. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to let them erase me. Morning crept slowly through the window. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired. I felt awake in a way I hadn't in years. Awake to the truth. Awake to the danger. Awake to my strength. And most importantly, awake to the secret I had buried for 20 years. A secret that now pulsed like a heartbeat beneath everything. They thought they held the power. They thought the forged signature gave them control. They thought pushing me out into the cold would break me. But they didn't understand one fundamental truth. You cannot break a woman who has already survived everything once. And as dawn lit the sky, streaking it with pale gold and silver, I realized something else, something quiet, fierce, and certain. They had underestimated the wrong woman, and the secret they never saw coming was no longer hiding. It was waking up, and so was I. Morning arrived without mercy. A thin, pale light slipped through the blinds of my little room above the hardware store, landing across the table where my husband's old leather notebook waited. I sat there for a long moment, letting the cold wooden floor steady me. The night before had cracked something open inside me. Not a violent crack, not rage, not despair, just a widening, a spreading understanding of the truth. I had been too tired, too loyal, too hopeful to acknowledge. I was no longer the woman who walked into the winter storm with a suitcase that wouldn't close. I was someone else entirely. Someone sharper, someone awake. I made myself tea and silently opened the notebook. It still smelled faintly of cedar and engine oil, 2 cents my husband carried with him everywhere. Inside it, the forged bank document rested like an accusation, proof of betrayal so calculated it almost felt personal. And maybe it was. They think I'm weak because I stayed, I whispered. But they have no idea how strong I become when I leave. I walked to the bank that morning with a straight spine and steady steps. The air bit at my cheeks, snow forming a soft crust over the street. Every breath formed frost on my scarf. People passed me, unaware that a war, silent but deadly, was unfolding inside me. The banker led me into a small office with glass walls and a desk too shiny to be trustworthy. I placed the document on his table. For a moment, his confidence faltered. He compared signatures, checked digital timestamps, ran the form through verification. Then he exhaled sharply. "This signature isn't natural," he murmured. "It appears to be traced." My throat tightened. Even when you expect betrayal, hearing it confirmed cuts deeper than imagined. But he wasn't done. There was something else, he continued, turning the screen slightly. A secondary request, a liquidation form. It wasn't submitted yet, but it was prepared. Liquidation? I repeated. The word tasted like rust. Yes, they intended to sell the property, quickly. My feet went cold. Not from winter. From the type of betrayal only family can commit, the kind born out of entitlement and quiet cruelty. My husband's legacy, the land he planted with his hands, the home where our children learned to walk, all of it prepared for sale without my consent, without my knowledge, and worse, without a shred of guilt. I walked out of the bank numb. The world looked grayer, muffled by snow that fell thicker now. Every step felt like I was walking across the ruins of something sacred. On my way back, I passed a cafe with fogged windows. I wasn't going to stop, but a voice, sharp, familiar, cut through the glass like a blade. "Melissa." Then my son. I froze. They were seated near the window, and the reflection in the glass hid me from view. I stood still, breath tight in my chest. "She's not coming back," Melissa said, stirring her coffee aggressively. "She knows she's not wanted. Just let it go." My son rubbed his forehead. "I didn't think it would get this far." "Oh, please. You worry too much." Melissa's voice dripped poison. "Once the sale goes through, we'll have money for renovations, for our future. Your mother had her chance." He didn't respond, so she pushed harder. "She's old, Daniel. She'll figure things out. It's not like she'll be around for another 20 years. My breath stilled. My vision blurred with shock. And then she delivered the sentence that shattered me. "We deserve this life. Not her. Not her. Not the woman who raised the man sitting across from her. Not the woman who worked 2 jobs for years so he never had to feel poor. Not the woman who held him through fevers, heartbreaks, failures. Not her." My heart cracked like ice under too much weight. I turned away before I collapsed right there on the sidewalk. I didn't want them to see me break. I didn't want the last shred of dignity I carried to shatter on that cold, wet street. Back in my small room, I didn't cry. Tears wouldn't fix anything. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote down every word I heard. Dates, exact sentences, tone, intent. Then I called Miss Davenport. She listened silently. When I finished, she didn't gasp or rush. She simply said, "Bring me everything. And whatever you do not let them know you overheard that conversation." "Why?" I asked. "Because the element of surprise," she said calmly, "is the mother's last advantage." So the strategy became simple. Let them think I was defeated. Let them think I was confused. Let them think I had nowhere to go. People are never more dangerous than when they underestimate the quietest person in the room. At her office, Miss Davenport laid everything out: the forged document, the timestamps, the liquidation draft. Then she unlocked a drawer and took out a file I'd never seen. "This," she said, "is an alternate inheritance plan your husband drafted before he died." My heart stumbled. I didn't know there was another, because he never submitted it. But he gave me a copy in case something ever threatened your security. My breath caught. She opened the file. "According to this, if anyone ever attempts to misuse your trust or undermine your ownership, your portion automatically increases. You have more control over the estate than you realize." I stared at her, stunned. My husband had known. He had anticipated betrayal not from our son, but from the world. He had built protection around me, quiet and sturdy, like the man he was. Melissa hadn't just failed in her scheme. She had walked straight into the legal trap my husband unknowingly set 20 years earlier. Over the next week, I responded to my son politely but briefly, ignored Melissa completely, stayed quiet, unseen, and silence became a mirror reflecting their guilt. My son texted, "Mom, can we talk? I haven't slept right. I feel like everything's wrong." Melissa's messages were sharper. "The bank is dragging their feet. We need you to finish the paperwork. You're causing delays." Each message revealed their panic. Each word exposed their fear. One night, Melissa called from an unfamiliar number. "Listen," she snapped. "I don't know what you're doing, but the bank isn't processing anything. We need you to sign." I told them nothing, I said, voice steady. "Then why is everything frozen?" "Maybe," I said softly, "because the truth has its own way of rising." She fell silent, then whispered, "What truth?" "The one you built your future on," I replied, "the one you thought I was too old to understand." She hung up, not in anger, but in fear. And fear is the beginning of collapse. That night, I wrote one final line at the bottom of my notebook. "They think the storm is behind them. They have no idea it has only just begun." The woman they threw out into the cold was gone. The woman rising now, slowly, deliberately, fiercely, was someone they were not prepared to face. The winter morning after the meeting with Miss Davenport felt strangely calm, as if the world itself was inhaling before the storm that was about to break. I woke early, my small rented room still wrapped in the soft gray light of dawn, and sat for a moment in the silence. Not the silence of defeat I had known weeks earlier, but a new kind, steady, grounded, resolute. For years, I had lived in a quiet that suffocated. Now, I lived in a quiet that empowered. My son and Melissa believed I was fragile, alone. They thought pushing me out would make me disappear. But people forget that silence sharpens more than it softens. Silence teaches you how to watch, how to remember, how to rise. And I had risen. The forged document, the bank inquiry, my husband's old letter, every piece of truth had gathered like stones in a riverbed, forming the path that would take me forward. And Act 3 began not with shouting, but with clarity. The family meeting, Miss Davenport arranged, took place a week later. It was a crisp afternoon, the sun painfully bright against the winter sky. I arrived early and waited in the quiet office. My notebook rested on my lap like armor. When my son and Melissa walked in, they came side by side, united in posture but not in breath. I could see the tension in my son's shoulders, the tightness around Melissa's mouth. Their confidence was a costume they didn't know was already slipping. Miss Davenport wasted no time. She placed the forged document on the table. "This signature is not authentic," she said. "We verified inconsistencies with previous notarized signatures. And more importantly, this transfer was initiated without my client's knowledge." Melissa stiffened. Maybe the bank made a mistake. My son looked at her, startled, a crack forming. Miss Davenport slid another document across the table. "And this attempted liquidation order? Also filed without her consent." The room froze. "You tried to sell my land," I said softly. "The land your father and I built our lives on." Melissa opened her mouth to speak, but my son's voice came first, small and cracking. "Sell? Melissa, you said I said what needed to be said," she snapped. That was the moment the collapse began, not loud, not dramatic, but in the soft shattering of a man realizing he had been weaponized by the person he loved most. He turned to me, pale. "Mom?" "I didn't know," You didn't want to know, I replied gently. And that is what hurt most. Melissa straightened in her chair, clinging to the last thread of control. You left the house, she said sharply. You abandoned us. We had to take over the responsibilities. You're making yourself the victim. I was thrown out, I said. And you locked the door behind me. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need to shout. Truth doesn't shout. It stands. Miss, Davenport continued, your attempt to obtain ownership through forgery can be prosecuted. Elder exploitation is a serious offense. My son flinched, his eyes wide. Elder exploitation? Yes, miss, Davenport said. Punishable by law, Melissa scoffed, but her eyes darted toward the exit, fear finally cracking through her composure. My son looked between us, suddenly seeing everything clearly. Melissa, he whispered, what did you do? What I had to do, she snapped. Your mother refused to sign anything. She acted like she owned everything. I was protecting our family, our future. You were protecting yourself, I said softly. Melissa glared. You think a piece of land matters more than your son's life? Than your grandchild's future? You're selfish. I exhaled. A long, sad breath. For years, I gave everything I had, I said. I helped with your baby. I cleaned your home. I stayed small so you could feel big. And you still saw me as an inconvenience. My son's face crumpled. Mom, I'm so sorry. This isn't about apologies, I said. It's about acknowledgement. About dignity. Miss, Davenport folded her hands. The land is now legally frozen. Your mother retains full control. If she chooses to pursue charges, she can. But she has decided I won't send anyone to prison, I said firmly. Not for my grandson's sake. Melissa exhaled in shaky relief. But, I continued, I will no longer allow myself to be erased. My son looked at me with tears in his eyes. I want to make this right, he whispered. That, I said, is a choice you will have to prove, not speak. After the meeting, we stepped outside into cold air that felt clearer than anything I'd breathed in years. My son walked behind me, hesitant, like a boy afraid to ask if he was still loved. Mom, he said quietly, can we talk? I turned. He stood with his hands shoved in his pockets, eyes red. I didn't know how to stand up to her, he said. I thought keeping peace meant staying silent. Silence isn't peace, I replied. Silence is surrender. And when you surrendered me. His voice cracked. I don't want to lose you. You lost me the night you looked away, I said softly. But you can earn me back, slowly, carefully. He nodded, tears falling freely now. I'll do anything. Good, I said gently. Start by learning how to be honest with yourself first. In the weeks that followed, Melissa moved out. Not because I demanded it, not because I forced anyone's hand, but because truth, once revealed, changes the entire structure of a family. My son began visiting me more often, quiet visits, humble ones. He brought photos of my grandson, updates about his day, small offerings of effort and sincerity. I didn't rush to forgive him. Forgiveness isn't a door that swings open easily once it's been slammed too many times. But I let him stand on the porch. I let him knock. Healing begins there. As for me, I built a new life. A small one, but fully my own. I began volunteering at a community center. I made friends with women who had walked through storms like mine. Women who were told they were burdens. Women who were erased from their own families. Women who found each other and rose anyway. And every day, I felt a little stronger. One evening, after a volunteer shift, I stepped outside to find my son waiting again. He looked calm, peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since he was young. Mom, he said, I want to earn your trust back. Not because I'm your son, but because I see the woman you are now. And I want to know her. The woman I am now. Not the one who bent, not the one who begged, not the one who stayed small, but the one who survived, who rose, who reclaimed her place in the world. I smiled softly. That woman, I said, is just getting started. He walked me home in the quiet winter night, not as a man leading his mother, but as a child learning how to walk beside her again. And as I reached my door, I realized something profound. I didn't win by fighting them. I won by choosing myself, by choosing truth, by choosing dignity, by choosing a future where I stood exactly where I belonged, not behind anyone, not beneath anyone, but firmly, completely in my own light. And for the first time in many years, I finally felt free. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of a moment you lived through, you can share it in the comments below. Your voice matters here. And if you'd like to hear more stories about family, forgiveness, strength, stories that remind us we're not alone, you're welcome to subscribe. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.